Hello and welcome to the Strong Suit Podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every single episode, I feature a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And my guest today, I'm super pumped to have him on the show because he's in Sunnyvale. He's building one of Silicon Valley's fastest growing HR technology companies, which happens to be around artificial intelligence, something that I'm very interested in, something that we all need to learn a lot more about. Let me tell you briefly about Sahil and his great company, AllyO. Now, he's the co-founder of the company, started in 2016 by a bunch of Google and MIT folks way smarter than me with a very simple mission. How do we use technology to make the recruiting experience faster, cheaper, better, right? Better for candidates, better for companies, better for everyone. And they're already working with some Fortune 500 companies to do this with a very slick AI recruiting system that uses natural language processing, machine learning, the whole enchilada. Sahil's going to take us through that. And let me tell you before we start that he and his team have raised $14 million from some of the top preeminent venture investors in the nation. Of course, Google, Bain Capital, Rockstars, the staffing and HR company, and Serve Ventures, phenomenal investors. So I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Sahil. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for inviting me and having me on the show.
Great to have you on. And over the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk a little about the product. And I want to make sure everyone understands what AllyO is all about. But we're really going to talk about how you have built this rocket ship, which I guess has about 50 people already. You've raised this capital, so presumably you're probably going to expand from there. So we'll get to that in a bit. But first, I want to make sure people understand the business and the product. So just give us 60 seconds on AllyO overall and kind of what led to this. Why did you decide to co-found the company?
Absolutely. So at a high level, AllyO is an end-to-end AI recruiter. And it's literally hired by some of the largest enterprises and growth companies out there to increase the capture of prospects or talent much more, to the extent that it's 200 to 600% more that we record. Automate all the routine tasks like screening, assessing them, scheduling them for interviews, extending an offer, even negotiating it, setting them for onboarding, training, post-hire check-ins, whatnot. All that happens via artificial intelligence, both in a conversational manner through AllyO and from an NLP feedback manner to get smarter and smarter, just like we humans do. And the way this came about is back in 2015, when we decided to start this, we spent around 8 months in all the malls of Bay Area. I kid you not, I could blindly walk around, know every store where, just to interview people and ask them, what's your problem as a job seeker? What's your problem as a hiring manager? And that, with a lot of testing, we started a staffing agency to make it more practical, eventually led to what's AllyO today.
Got it. Very good. So it really grew from an observation that this connection between candidates and companies is still relatively inefficient. So you laid out a pretty big proposition there, right? If you're successful, recruiters like me will be out of business, and God willing, that would be great, right? Go to the beach. But one thing you said really caught my ear. You're going to have AI negotiating compensation. That one I'd love to understand, right? I think it's very believable, the scheduling, finding candidates online, assessing resumes, things like that. I think everyone can understand how AI can be helpful in those things. Tell me how a computer negotiates compensation.
So imagine you get to a stage where AllyO has conducted one round of interview, has taken you through a mathematics or a personality or a language assessment, you've aced it, schedules an interview with you for you with the hiring team, you ace that, the hiring team goes back into the ATS and says hire. At that time, AllyO picks you up from the ATS and reaches out to Jeff saying, you know what, love the experience, want to extend an offer out to you. Here's our traditional terms and conditions of the offer. Would you be willing to accept? And consider a case of, say, it's an internship, $15 an hour, a 15-day probation. This is your joining date. Do you accept or not? And they've received that. You've received it over text messaging. And if you say no, then AllyO will come back and say, what is it that you're expecting? And now it's basically just you're going in the range. So somebody comes back and says, hey, I want 18. And you say, we can do 15.75 and we can just seal the deal right now.
Yeah,
you can go back and forth to do that. And at some point you can loop in the hiring member. But when you have, especially in cases when you have high volume of hires, you can automate that process quite effectively.
So what kind of roles do you envision that this in the future will be most optimized for? I mean, it seems like it would be particularly useful for some jobs more so than others, right? What are those?
Totally. I mean, 80% of the US are high volume recruits, right? You've got the hourly labor market, you've got university interns and college grads. 80% of the market is that. And when it's high volume, you can't afford to have human recruiters or recruiting coordinators behind every job rec.
Yep.
You just can't. That's why you use technology. And by the fact that a majority of the market is that, and the fact that it's high volume, naturally AI and automation disrupts that first.
Yep.
The second layer of that is that the interviewing is much more objective than if you're interviewing somebody who is going to be a physician, right, in a hospital.
Right.
It's much more objective than subjective. And so you can do it in a much more conversational manner, not relying so much on the softer side of intelligence that humans are much better at.
So I'm guessing higher compensation roles, more complex roles, those are things that will probably be the last to go to this type of structure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, all our customers, they will start with the lower compensation roles and then go up the pyramid.
Got it. Okay, so now we understand what the product is and the vision is. It makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about your process internally. I would think that you're the master recruiter, right? You must have some very innovative process. So walk people through kind of what your internal recruiting process looks like. Anything that's unique about it, or are you using your own product? What does it kind of look like?
Totally. So we, on average, we hire like crazy. From year to date, we have increased our team size by more than 300%. And the biggest question that comes when you're hiring so much is that you cannot compromise on quality. You absolutely come. And just to reinstate your first point, I am in Sunnyvale, California, where it is super hard or super expensive to hire.
And both. No, it's an and.
Yeah, it is an and, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been very interesting on how to recruit here. It actually depends a lot on what function you're recruiting for, and you need to customize it by that. When you're recruiting for engineers, you're solving a lot for the quality of the engineer, and the interview process is heavily reliant on site. When they're here, they're solving problems with you, you're testing them out, you're giving them assessments, and you're seeing how to make it work. You also tend to be a lot more patient, because a great engineer can completely change the game of a product company like ours. Completely change it. It's not a surprise that the top engineer at Google makes $50 million, which is much more than a Fortune 500 CEO.
Sure.
Right? And so
because they're 50 to 100 times more productive, more effective than an average engineer.
They're creating value more than $2.5 billion, right? The $50 million you're paying them is creating at a company that's Google valued at $700 billion.
Yeah.
Some X% of that, less than 1%, is coming from one guy.
Right.
Right. And you just see that. You just always see that. So the process tends to be very heavy on site when it comes to engineers. When you use a system like AllyO to engage with engineers, you're not trying to screen them or ask them. You're trying to sell them the job.
Sure.
You're selling them on the technology, the technical challenge. So the engagement is very, very different. It's very, very different. On the other hand, when you're looking at some of the other roles, these are skills that are not so hard. They're very soft skills that you can pick from a variety of industries. So if I want to find somebody for partnerships, or I want to find somebody from sales or customer success, guess what? I can actually pick up folks from the recruiting industry who would totally kick ass.
Yeah.
Totally kick ass in each of these. But you can't pick up somebody from recruiting to come and do software development. right? And so you have a much broader variety of talent acquisition. And as a result, the talent pool is broader. And so in those situations, we found AllyO can go a little deeper into screening them for things like, hey, can you relocate?
Yeah.
You know, we need you to start by step first.
And
things that are objective to do that.
So let me ask you.
Go on.
Please.
I was going to say the process that we've perfected here is two things. One is the mindset that you have to have at least 3 to 5 people interview each person who's hired. Second, each person has an equal vote. So you need to get 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 to get it. If you don't get it, no matter who, there's no like hierarchy, nothing.
But it doesn't need to be unanimous.
Pass.
It doesn't need to be unanimous.
It doesn't need to be unanimous.
And it doesn't
need to be unanimous.
Is it a vote, or is that input into the hiring manager and then he or she makes the decision?
It's actually input into the hiring manager to conduct a reference check. Because that is an amazingly useful part where you've sat down and done the feedback. You've said, hey, we want to extend the offer. Let's go to a reference check. Get the references, and for the 2 people or whatever aspects have been missed in the interview or have felt negative, you push on them.
And who does the reference check?
The manager who the candidate has to report to.
Got it. So if everyone loved the candidate and wants to hire them, except for the hiring manager, they conduct the references, but obviously if they choose to, not listen to what they're told, they can say no on the hire, right? It's ultimately up to the hiring manager.
At that point, yes, but the reference checking is also as standardized as it can get, because we spend a lot of time trying to train on how to do reference checks. You can always find 3 people who will say, I love you.
Sure.
I love this guy. But that's not valuable. It's going deeper into, hey, here's what we need. Can you give me 2 examples where they've done that?
Yep. Got it. And get backdoor references, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, as someone that's been at Google and obviously hiring a lot of engineers for this venture, which is focused on artificial intelligence, how do you balance interviewing and assessing for competencies, true engineering skill set, and then DNA, right? Ability to get along with others, play nicely, et cetera. Sometimes those don't always come in the same package. So how do you weight those 2? How do you prioritize those 2? Is there anything that's just non-negotiable, no matter how smart the guy is or gal is, that you'll walk away?
Yeah. Whether it's engineering, whether it's sales, the hard skills, the function-specific skills are secondary. In a startup, we found the number one thing, the 2 things that we found the biggest factors of success. Number one is attitude. You see something that's broken, you need to have the spirit to fix it. You can't raise your hand. It's a startup.
It's accountability. I want to be held accountable.
Accountability.
And
but
proactivity.
Beyond your function, right? Yeah. You're somebody who's doing customer success, and you need to go to a customer and give a demonstration. Guess what? You're doing that every week. Record a video. Don't say, I need a media person to come and record a video.
Yeah.
That's one, right? And second is curiosity and eagerness to learn the product. You come into the startup, it's a product-driven killer product, very differentiated. You need to feel very attached to the product, because only then do you give, as a user, feedback. Do you file bugs? Do you actually feel everything that's done week on week to deliver the expansion of the product?
So you've had multiple cases where you've met a candidate, very talented engineer. She or he had the competencies, but you walked away because the DNA was not there.
Walked away, or it didn't work out?
Yeah. Or you hired them.
It's hard to test for attitude.
Yeah.
It's hard to test for attitude.
Yeah.
Very competent, very successful. You meet folks, Oracle has one of the best salespeople. They've hit their quota left, right, and center, killing it. But guess what? They think at that point you're killing it so much that you have the ego and you think the startup, I'm above and beyond the startup.
So when you've made mishires, and I know hiring 50 people, you must have hired someone that was a mishire along the way. How long do you give them before you realize, what, we've made a mistake here? We misestimated the DNA of the person.
Yeah. So firstly, we have to conduct a couple of performance reviews to indicate and give them an opportunity to improve. And people have turned around. They really have turned around. So you have to do that. And it needs to be very constructively put forward. That's first. I think end of the day, there's a mindset here that you're not letting them go. You tried to make it work. You both came together. You had an honest conversation. Yeah. You said that, hey, this is not working out for us. This is what we have observed about your input. What do you think about it? And if it doesn't work, then you help them find the next job. Help them find the next job. And so typically we've at least given 2 months, sometimes given more. But attitude is something that also changes over time. Sometimes after you get your bonus, your attitude changes.
Of course. Okay, so we've covered retention. For the last few minutes, I'd like to switch to, we talked about recruiting. I want to talk about retention. So you mentioned you're in Sunnyvale, ground zero of Silicon Valley, potentially the hardest recruiting market in the world, but more importantly, hard for retention, holding on to your existing people when salaries are going up almost weekly from what I've seen. So what do you do? How are you holding on to these people when their headhunter phone calls are every day?
It's all about the culture. We've been lucky. We are over 50 people and we've not had a single person voluntarily churn. Very lucky. And the culture is one that you can define it the way you want from a theoretical sense, but it really gets defined by input from everybody. Like just as of today, we have an employee survey out there to understand, what do you want? Do you think you're not getting enough feedback? Or do you think you're not getting enough coconut water? What is it that's missing?
Yeah.
Right. And people voice that either anonymously or in the all hands. Like my last meeting was the all hands, where people said, hey, what in your mind is the differentiation of the product with the market, and why are we seeing so many players come up? Why is it getting so hot so quickly?
Yeah.
And you need to have a transparent conversation. So that's one. You need to take input from people and you need to respond to it, because it's a company. It's not a founder. It is a company, right? That's one. Right. Second is, I think we are unique, but we have, except for conflicting things, every data and every metric is transparently available to the whole company.
Including compensation or no?
No. So that's conflicting.
Okay.
So that's the part that's hidden. But the roll-up of that, weekly costs, the roll-up by function of weekly costs, our revenue, how much of it is recurring, how much of it is services, contract value, everything transparently. And it's the same dashboard that's available to all the investors, that's available to all the employees.
How do you balance the need for confidentiality, not with your employees, but so that it doesn't leak, or a disgruntled employee who maybe leaves one day, I know you haven't lost any yet, shares it with competitors or others? How do you balance that? Or is it just trust?
Well, firstly, you trust the people and you trust your relationship. Hopefully people are not leaving disgruntled, right? You need to tactfully manage. Now, that's not always the case. And to be honest, the value that you get by sharing it with everyone far supersedes whatever risk aversion one might have with that value going to one competitor.
Sure.
Right? It far supersedes.
Yeah, you almost
you're solving for
a company without it.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so you just the way you solve for customers that you love working with, same way you solve for employees that you love working with. You can't solve for everyone.
Right. So before we wrap up, here's one of the questions I really wanted to ask you as a former Google engineer, correct?
I was McKinsey. My co-founder was Google.
Got it. Just as good. And you've hired, I'm assuming, some folks from Google, perhaps?
Our first engineer was from Google.
Very good. So, Google's respected as a very good place to work, is able to pay quite a bit to employees, is known for having benefits and all kinds of other things, right? The chef and everything that people read about times 10 probably.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for listeners who lead a 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 person company who have to compete with Google for talent? Google, Facebook, Apple, you name it, right? Whether it's in Silicon Valley or New York or Chicago, any place. What can they do? What would you say to them, having seen you and your co-founder seeing places like McKinsey and Google that can afford to pay incredibly well, can afford to do things first class, and then you're a struggling, if you will, 50-person company. How do you compete for talent?
Yeah, I think two or three things. One, you got to solve interesting problems. You just got to transform things. The challenge is the biggest kick here. It is not easy.
So
it's
in other words,
hours.
let's pause there. If you're trying to build a company and you're not thinking big enough, where you're trying to reimagine or reinvent a category or do something meaningful, very hard to attract top talent because that's what they're drawn to.
Very hard. Very hard. I mean, you don't leave Google to go make money. You might, but you're making good money in Google. You're leaving Google to be much more core and closer to a big problem that you can solve.
Yeah.
And that's one of them. I think the second of it is the culture. I think when you're in a large company, you often just get lost.
But be specific. Culture is such an annoying word sometimes, right?
It's vague.
What about culture? Because it's hard to say McKinsey and Google don't have great culture. So what is it about a 50-person culture that can't compete with them on many dimensions? What can you offer to a candidate that they can't?
You show up that 1 week of work, one week of work. By the end of the week, you see how you've transformed the company, because the company grows 15 to 20% month over month.
Right.
And you can exactly see that, hey, I had a call with a Fortune 5 company this morning who asked me for calendar integration. And I, as an engineer, got onto the call and spoke with the CHRO and demoed that.
So it's impact. It's the ability to make the impact that at a big company, no fault of a big company, it's really hard to make an impact, right? Because like you said, you're a number and things move slower, bureaucracy. So the caveat there is, if you're a small company and you've got bureaucracy and you're moving slowly, something's wrong, right? Because you need to leverage that as a recruiting advantage. If you had to put your finger on one more thing, challenge, impact, what would another be?
I would actually say Silicon Valley, especially the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, have cracked it with giving these extra benefits that seem expensive, but have probably the highest ROI in the company.
Give some examples.
You giving dinner. If I offer dinner, we offer breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can expense on. But your dinner has to be after 7 p.m. Has to be after 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody stays till 7 p.m. And you're giving them $15 of dinner and they're creating $200 of value, my God, what an ROI.
Right.
Same goes with, we allow people to expense food while they're working from home.
Sure.
You expense food. Why are you going to waste time cooking when you can work, do things that you want, and just order the food from DoorDash?
So on the other, to play devil's advocate, those are not things necessarily that one would say drives work-life integration or balance, right? You're looking to get the most productivity out of these folks, but you're giving them a choice. You're not saying you must stay till 7. You're saying that, hey, if you work those kinds of hours and you want to stay till 7, we'll feed you. So,
actually, I would put it the other way. It gives flexibility to people.
Got it.
Look, it's not the person who shows up for breakfast is there till dinner. Or absolutely, it's probably the first 1 month. First 1 month they'll do that, right? It's all free perks.
There's only so much free food you can eat, though, right?
Yeah, there's only so much. I mean, you've seen what happens to Googlers 1 year down. They pick up 20 pounds, right? Everyone picks up weight, and so I think it's the ability to give them that flexibility through those perks, such that they can actually have a better work-life balance by not having to spend time on other things that would have taken them away from work.
So it sounds like it's challenge, it's the ability to make an impact, and it's high ROI, but relatively inexpensive perks and benefits that mean a lot to people. So I see this a lot of times with smaller companies. They can't afford to pay as much on base salary or cash compensation, but they've got some great perks. They just forget to talk about them, or they don't, they forget to bring them up to candidates.
Yeah. Or I'll tell you, most people don't look at it that way. They don't realize the ROI. They look at it as a cost.
It's an expense, not an investment. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, Sahil, I've learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you making the time. How can people learn more about AllyO or get in touch with you?
Well, you can always contact me at sahil@alio.com, go to our website, alio.com, or contact us generically at hello@alio.com. This is obviously what we're doing is super impactful, but it also makes us super busy. And so anyone who wants to communicate and connect with us, really appreciate and welcome that opportunity.
Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah.